O'clock on my computer. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You can go ahead and advance the slide. We can acknowledge our supporting partners here. So welcome to everyone. So just want to really quickly acknowledge San Jose State University School of Information and the Future of AI for their support of this. Welcome to Articulating Generative Artificial Intelligence Information Literacy Competencies within the ACRL framework. My name is Melissa Jones. I am the Literature Liaison Librarian at Georgetown University, and joining me also are my colleagues Ladislava Khailova, the Director of Georgetown School of Continuing Studies Library, and Melissa Netzband Wathen, the Public Services Librarian at the School of Continuing Studies Library as well. We would also like to acknowledge our colleague Beth Marhanka, Head of Outreach and Engagement, who was instrumental in developing this project and has worked collaboratively with us throughout the process. Feel free to use the chat for any questions and comments you have. We're going to just keep rolling through into the agenda. So again, thanks for joining us. As our title suggests, we've been working on mapping competencies for using generative AI to the ACRL framework for information literacy for higher education. In today's session, we're going to walk through the project background, our methodology, the results of our Gen AI competency mapping, and our plans for implementation and next steps. So we'll cover just a little bit of background information that foregrounds our work and then get into the meat of the project. So just institutionally, Georgetown is a private R1 university located in Washington, D.C. Founded in 1789, it is the oldest Catholic and Jesuit university in the United States. It enrolls just over 18,000 students across the main campus, law center, and medical campuses. Our main campus students and faculty are primarily supported by the John Mark Lauinger Memorial Library, and our campus community as a whole is additionally supported by the Blommer Science Library, the Bioethics Research Library, and the School of Continuing Studies Library. Our project team in particular represents both Lauinger and the SCS Library, with individuals serving in library instruction and outreach and engagement roles. And all of the members of our project team are part of either the library's Generative AI Working Group, the Instruction Coordinating Committee, or both. So you can go to the next slide. Just a few more words here. As a library, we recognize the transformative and disruptive nature of generative AI, and like many institutions, have been grappling with how this might impact our work, particularly as it may radically change the research landscape. Given this, the library has a strategic focus to enhance AI literacy among students and faculty and promote the integration of AI technologies and tools into the research process and library services and operations. As a smaller part of this larger goal, our group was tasked to integrate AI into instruction services as appropriate to empower users in AI-assisted research methodologies and enhance their AI literacy skills. And in order to meet this goal, our group believed that it was important to first define what the core AI information literacy competencies are prior to providing any instructor training sessions or developing curricular materials. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Melissa Netzband Wathen, who will talk more about our methodology.
Thank you so much. So we decided to use the ACRL framework for information literacy in higher education as our organizing principle. The ACRL framework recognizes threshold concepts necessary for individuals to be information literate. While the framework was designed in 2015 and thus launched well before the advent of generative AI as foundational pedagogical document for library instruction, it continues to serve as a foundational document used by the library community. As such, it provides a lens through which to understand how to ethically and effectively use and apply generative AI and situates GAI in the existing landscape of information resources. The rapid integration of generative AI into academic research represents a significant shift in how knowledge is created, evaluated, and shared. As librarians, we must be prepared to support faculty and students, many of whom are already engaging with these tools in their work, by providing guidance on their responsible and informed use. Next slide, please. Our literature review was not a comprehensive one. Instead, we focused specifically on research related to academic libraries and Gen AI literacy within that context. We drew from a broad range of sources, ensuring diverse perspectives were considered, identifying published competencies and guidelines for the use of generative AI in higher education and libraries. These included frameworks from major organizations such as MLA and EDUCAUSE, as well as competency lists published in scholarly journals. In total, we identified 12 existing competency lists, which helped us understand how AI literacy is being framed and supported within the field. Each team member was assigned specific literature to review with the goal of identifying connections to the ACRL framework for information literacy. As we mapped these sources to the framework, we aligned each resource with the relevant competencies within the 6 frames. However, because multiple team members were involved in this process, interpretations and justifications for these alignments sometimes varied. Additionally, since the ACRL frames have overlapping concepts, we encountered some repetition in our mapping, reinforcing how interconnected these competencies are when applied to AI literacy. I will now hand it over to Ladislava to discuss how ChatGPT helped us refine our mapping.
So what also sets our methodology apart is that we leverage the ChatGPT to synthesize the competencies that we identified in our mapping spreadsheet. So here, rather than relying on a single prompt to generate a full list from the get-go, we took an iterative approach. So we gradually refined the output to enhance the clarity and relevance of the final product. One of the main techniques that we utilized here when interacting with the chatbot was what's called the pyramid approach to prompt priming. And this basically entails starting with the broad foundational prompts, like checking the ChatGPT's knowledge of the ACRL framework. And from there, we progressively narrowed our focus, providing more specific and targeted instructions to refine the competencies for each of the frames. We also applied prompt chaining, and that means that rather than starting from scratch with every prompt, we kind of engaged in a human-like dialogue with the chatbot, where we would build upon the ChatGPT's previous responses. And this in turn allowed us to take what the chatbot generated, refine it further, and then increasingly get more and more precise results with each round of the prompts. So what did this process actually look like in practice? So first, at the foundation level of this pyramid approach to prompt priming, we made sure that ChatGPT had a solid understanding of the ACRL framework. So to do this, as you can see from the prompt 1 on the slide, we basically prompted it to summarize the key tenets of the framework, ensuring that it had the necessary context before moving forward. And then next, at the refinement level or the mid-level of the pyramid, we uploaded the spreadsheet where we mapped all of these competencies from the literature and then worked with the chatbot through it one frame at a time. So for instance, starting with the authority is constructed and contextual frame, we asked ChatGPT to simply extract and then refine the relevant competencies, then eliminate any redundancies that it spotted, and then improve the clarity. And finally, at the precision level, and that's the tip of the pyramid right there, we focused on streamlining the output. So for instance, ChatGPT initially gave us 14 competencies for a single frame, which is obviously too many. So we worked with it to reduce it to 3 to 5 broader competencies. And then we also asked for well-defined descriptions that would accompany each of these individual competencies. So we repeated this structured process throughout all of the 6 frames, applying both the pyramid prompt priming technique and the prompt chaining to iteratively improve and then consolidate the final set of competencies that we were seeking. Now, what I want to also emphasize is that at every stage of the prompting process, as I outlined it so far, we encouraged the chatbot to engage in self-review to improve the accuracy and the quality of the output. So in other words, rather than sort of being like passive bystanders and watching it do its work and accepting all of the responses, we used strategic prompting techniques to refine and validate the competencies further on. One of these techniques is called reflection prompting. And this basically means that you guide ChatGPT to sort of step back and then assess its work and then make iterative improvements to it. So for instance, we asked it to take on the role of a second expert and recheck the source spreadsheet to identify any inconsistencies or areas for refinement that it could find. This created a sort of a built-in feedback loop that enhanced the precision of the product. We also used trio thoughts prompting technique. If you never used it, just try it out. It's a ton of fun. It's my favorite. And they basically allows the ChatGPT to explore multiple reasoning paths, so to speak. So it acts almost like a panel of experts debating different perspectives. As shown on the screenshot of the chatbot's work on the right-hand side, this approach encouraged the AI to evaluate alternatives, then weigh different interpretations, and ultimately arrive at a more informed consensus. So by combining all of these techniques, we ensure that the resulting competencies were both well aligned with the frames, but also internally consistent. I would also like to highlight that even with all of these advanced prompting techniques, including asking it to self-review, the human review or the human agent librarian review of the quality of the outputs always remained essential to the process. So accordingly, we repeatedly refined specificity by prompting the chatbot to focus on measurable outcomes. We also removed any repetitions of working with the bot to revise overlapping competencies or to improve distinctiveness. And finally, we also made stylistic adjustments to the product, ensuring that there were smooth transitions and that there was academic clarity for both our librarian and faculty audiences present in the product. So these human-guided improvements then help produce even a more polished product, right? More polished set of the Gen AI competencies. This human-led assessment really continued to be a critical piece of our process even after the chatbot created what it thought was the final list of competencies. So even after we finished working with it and prompting it, we continued reviewing the product. So here we took the list that the chatbot produced and then hand-checked it against our source spreadsheet, really line by line going through it and making sure that any key areas of the Gen AI proficiency, such as ethics or prompt engineering, were neither over nor underrepresented in the list. We made corresponding manual edits as needed. And additionally, we then conducted one last fact check where we verified that the competencies aligned well with the ACRL frames, and also integrating references to the individual sources that we indexed to the final product to enhance the credibility even further. So you might be wondering, so this was a lot of back and forth between the chatbot and us. So how does it all weigh out? So in the end, we found that the ChatGPT significantly increased our efficiency and productivity in the Gen AI competency compilation process. It really did save us a ton of time, while also providing what we thought was a consistent voice and style to the draft, right? It would be hard to do with multiple people producing the competencies. And last but not least, it also did deliver a high level of accuracy. But with all that said and done, really the human oversight was equally crucial because it resulted in additional validation and refinements that I mentioned before, making the final list of competencies both comprehensive, but also true to the literature review that we started this process with. And I'll now turn it over back to Melissa Netzband Wathen, who will discuss the finalized list of the Gen AI competencies as anchored in the ACRL framework.
Thank you. So our end result is the generative AI literacy competencies, which adapt the 6 frames of the ACRL framework for information literacy for higher education by integrating Gen AI specific competencies and descriptions within each frame. As you can see from the example shown, each frame is clearly linked back to the ACRL framework with a short description of the frame from the framework itself provided. From there, we name each Gen AI competency, followed by descriptions and citations that further explain each of them. And now to the competencies themselves. For the ACRL Frame 1, authority is constructed and contextual. We have recognize and evaluate the parameters of AI authority, apply verification strategies for AI generated information, and collaborate effectively with AI in decision making. Next, we have the second frame being information creation as a process. Demonstrate knowledge of generative AI processes and applications, generate and refine content through iterative prompt engineering, evaluate AI tools and address ethical considerations, and leverage AI for innovation and collaboration. Moving to the third frame, we have information has value. Analyze the value and impact of AI-generated content, understand intellectual property and scholarly integrity, and apply data literacy principles and ethical data practices. For the fourth frame, research as inquiry, we have evaluate AI's role in research challenges, develop research workflows incorporating AI tools and processes, and integrate AI into iterative research processes. For the fifth frame, scholarship as conversation, engage in ethical and inclusive AI discourse, foster collaborative and multidisciplinary learning with generative AI, and develop models and applications of AI for use in scholarship, teaching, and learning. And for the sixth frame, we have discern the appropriate AI tool for specific tasks, engage in thoughtful iterative prompt engineering in AI tools, and critically evaluate prompt engineering strategies and results. I will now hand it over to Melissa Jones to discuss implementation and next steps.
Melissa, sorry, I think you are muted.
Thank you. I was in the middle of responding to something in the chat and then switched over, my bad. So just talk a few ways about that, how we're going to implement these within our own library. One of the big things is a Train the Trainer initiative. In order to prepare our Georgetown instruction librarians to integrate Gen AI literacy into their teaching, we are planning to offer 2 training sessions in the late spring and early summer of 2025. One on the competencies conceptually and one on applying the competencies. In the second session particularly, we'll consider how to incorporate these competencies into lesson planning and goal setting in library instructional settings. These sessions will also give our instructors an opportunity to reflect on their own knowledge and identify any knowledge gaps that need to be filled so that we can engage with AI and research more effectively. Additionally, we'll be seeking opportunities to share these competencies university-wide, both by sharing with the university's Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship and by sharing directly with departmental faculty as appropriate. We're also planning to develop a workshop series for the GU community based on these competencies that will launch in the fall 2025 semester. And just as a quick side note, we're also collecting feedback actively from our student body regarding their experience with, interest in, and questions about using generative AI that will inform that series as well. And so with that, we want to thank you so much for your attention, for your time. We're happy to answer any questions. I know that there is a question in the chat about will the frames be shared? And I think that is a very excellent question. That's what I was in the process of answering when I forgot to unmute myself. So maybe we can just talk about that for a few minutes to get started with questions. And then if anyone has other questions, we can address those as well. Does that sound like a good plan? Yeah. So I know that ultimately we do want to share the frames. We're hoping to incorporate feedback both from this session, but also from our other library instructors at Georgetown as we make some kind of further tweaks and iterative changes. But ultimately, yes, we do want to share these more broadly with the library community when they're in their final state. You all are getting a sneak preview in some ways. Ladka, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to second what you just shared. Obviously, this session, as everyone knows, is being recorded, and while we did not include the descriptions of the individual competencies, you will have access to the full list of competencies as reflected on those 6 slides. So please stay tuned to any additional editing that we will conduct based on the feedback that we receive both in this session and through our internal circles. And then we'll share it out later. Ultimately, we were hoping for publication. As you know, that's a long road, and with the other groups, including the ACRL task force, working on these competencies, we cannot guarantee that it will ultimately happen, but there will be a public sharing in one way or another of the descriptions, including those competencies that were shared today.
See, there's another question in the chat about sharing the literature review. Ladka, do you think that's something that we might share earlier, or do you think it's, I mean, because it certainly would be part of, it's appended to the competencies as we've drafted them out at the moment.
Yes, I mean, to explain kind of what the final product of the lit review was, I don't know if the participants recall the slide that Melissa Netzband Wathen created, but our literature review was not produced in a narrative form, which is the golden standard. We produced it as a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, where we basically were keeping track of the individual Gen AI competencies as reflected in those articles that we decided to include in that lit review. If anyone thinks that it would be helpful for them to have access to that, I believe I can speak for the group here. We can share it, just shoot us an email. Any of those 3 email addresses that you have there will do. And we will be happy to send it your way.
Absolutely. I see that Olga Kaz has a question. It says, UNESCO, ARL, and ACRL decided to create AI literacy competencies separate from information literacy. What's our opinion about that?
Start on that. When Melissa Jones and I first came together to figure out how we wanted to even start the process of Gen AI literacy competencies, the thing that came to mind for us was that so much of AI literacy is based on information literacy. You need to be information literate before you can really tackle these skills, and they're all interconnected. So we thought that incorporating it into the framework that we already all know and love made a lot of sense for us. It also gave us a well-known and loved structure to go off of when kind of organizing all of the thoughts that were out there on generative AI and the literacies out there. So that's kind of where we started, and it was really a first step of organizing the chaos, and then really just started making sense for us as we started going through all of the literature that we did go through, that it connected very well. I'll let Melissa and Ladislava kind of keep going with that, but that's kind of the start of where we started with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to add that there is strong value in all of these major organizations producing these broader sets of Gen AI competencies. Obviously, the audience for those competencies is not as refined as the groups that we were creating this for. But to put in a pitch for our work here, I wanted to say that that's what makes our project unique, right? This is the value added of our project. So we are not competing with these lists of competencies as produced by ARL or ultimately ACRL or UNESCO, but we are adding onto it kind of on a additional level, kind of drilling through what these would translate into when we look at the information literacy through a more narrow lens, so to speak. And to Melissa Netzband-Wathen's point, I mean, the framework is not going anywhere, right? We will continue using it as library instructors. So we think that it's definitely worthwhile for us to try to incorporate this additional list of competencies into what is already out there rather than having like ultimately separate sets of competencies that we have to utilize concurrently.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing I would add to what my colleagues have said, so I've done a lot of work with our writing program and AI, and one of the things that has been most critical to helping our students work with AI is actually applying principles of information literacy. So how do we understand the notion of authority? How do we understand the notion of scholarship as a conversation? And it has actually been a tremendously helpful framework for entering into those conversations with AI alongside of our other library tools. Because in some ways, we need the same critical thinking skills. We need to really be applying information literacy as we're engaging with AI. And so for us, that was just the heartbeat of this project. I like to the question about like whether UNESCO or ARL or ACRL decided not to. I can understand why they wouldn't, honestly, because if you're looking at a broader audience, like say if you're looking at all library staff, well, not all library staff are instructors. And so the information literacy parts of it that we're leaning into may feel less relevant and may feel a little bit more foreign, say, to our colleagues in cataloging. And so we're kind of making a very particular application. But I do understand why the other organizations maybe chose another path with that. So hopefully we answered that question. I see it's 5:26. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I know there is a closing session coming up. If there's any other final short questions, I think we can maybe take one. Let's see. Oh. Excellent. Well, thank you all. We just value your time. We know you're all busy people. We appreciate you so much, and we hope you've really enjoyed the conference.